Today's goal is 100 berries. Smash that button to get that juicy fruit and hit subscribe for more amazing recaps. Now let's get into it. Earlier, the king had spoken to Princess Yong Su about arranging a marriage for her, but she had refused, running away in tears, shouting, "Father, I hate you." The king called after her in distress. Queen Yong Su, sitting beside him, tried to reassure him. "Isn't she still young? I'll speak with her and try to ease her worries. Please don't be too troubled." The king, clearly distressed, held his head and sighed. Raising children is certainly no easy task. The next morning, as Yong strolled through the palace, he noticed a flurry of palace maids rushing around. Curious, he looked over to a nearby eunuch and asked, "Why are the maids so busy this early? Is something going on?" The eunuch bowed deeply and whispered, "Your Highness, it seems the princess has been fasting since yesterday." He then handed a letter to Yong and added, "One of the princess's maids requested I deliver this to you, Your Highness." Yong was taken aback. A letter from her? He unfolded the letter and read it carefully. After finishing, he folded it back and instructed the eunuch, "Prepare for a discreet outing. I need to go on a secret patrol. Hurry and ensure we're not seen by my father." The two eunuchs, caught off guard, exchanged a glance before quickly replying, "Yes, Your Highness," and scurried off to make arrangements. Meanwhile, the king continued to inquire about Yong Su's condition. "I heard Yong Su refused to eat breakfast today. Is this true?" A eunuch respectfully replied, "Yes, Your Majesty, it's true." The king sighed in frustration. "Oh no," he muttered, sitting down. "Has the queen said anything?" The eunuch, visibly nervous, replied, "Her Majesty is still trying to console her, but Princess Yong Su refuses to listen." The king, rubbing his temples in distress, lamented, "When one child settles, the other stirs up trouble." At Princess Yong Su's residence, Yong arrived and casually gestured to the two maids. "Report." They immediately bowed and said, "Your Highness, the crown prince has arrived." Yong Su's voice came from within the room. "Let him in." As Yong entered, he dismissed the maids. "Thank you for your efforts." The maids bowed politely before leaving. Yong sat beside his sister, who was still hiding under her blanket. He sighed. "You've been through quite a bit lately." Yong Su peeked out from under the blanket, adjusted her hair, and asked eagerly, "Did you bring what I asked for?" Yong took a small packet from inside his sleeve, exhaling dramatically. "Do you know I had to sneak around and dodge father just to bring this to you? It wasn't easy." Yong Su eagerly took a piece of gang rong from the packet, licking her lips. "I know, but this gang rong is from the specific shop I asked for, right?" Yong, resting his chin in boredom, replied, "Yes, it is, but seriously, shouldn't you start thinking about finding a suitor? Otherwise, people will start calling you an old maid." Hearing this, Yong Su bristled, biting her snack and pointing at him furiously. "Shut up. This is all your fault." Yong looked bewildered. What does your marriage have to do with me?" She crushed the gang rong in her hand, trembling with anger, her eyes fierce. "Even if I do marry, I'll make sure to teach that fool, Liu, a lesson first," she declared dramatically. "For my beloved gang rong." Yong could only shake his head, exasperated. I have nothing more to say. Just take care of yourself, sister." "Thanks for the gang rong," she replied, lost in her thoughts, nibbling at the snack. Yong, still confused, thought to himself as he walked away, "She's really serious about that?" Hands behind his back, he mused, "I might as well pay a visit to that Liu while I'm at it. I still have some gang rong left." In the garden pavilion, Liu sat with his tutor, engaged in conversation. When Yong arrived, they both looked up in surprise. "Oh, Crown Prince." The tutor and Liu both stood to greet him. Yong smiled politely. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was passing by and thought I'd stop to say hello." They bowed respectfully. "Your Highness, we're honored. Is your brother well?" the tutor inquired. Yong returned the smile. "Yes, he's doing well. How are your studies, Liu?" Liu lowered his gaze and replied with a challenging tone. "I'm working hard so I don't fall behind my older brother, though it seems you have plenty of free time." Outwardly, Yong smiled, but inside he fumed. "Why is this brat so insistent on provoking me?" Before he could respond, Yong Su appeared, crossing her arms and glaring at Liu. I heard you've been causing trouble with the palace maids. Is that true? Liu scoffed. Aren't they just servants? Why are they reporting me to you? Turning to leave, he added, If you're done, I'll be going. Yong Su, trembling with fury, shouted after him, You little brat, is that how a prince with Taizo the Great's blood should act? Stunned, Liu stumbled, falling back in shock. Yong Su continued furiously, Your brother, the crown prince, respects everyone, including the servants. But you dare call them lowly? Her voice fierce, she declared, I'll teach you to never speak like that again. Terrified, Liu began to cry. I'm sorry, sister. I'm truly sorry. Yong Su softened her tone, correcting him. Apologize to those you've wronged, not to me. Liu nodded, still sniffling. I understand. I'll apologize to them. Yet, moments later, Liu's tone shifted again, a hint of arrogance returning. Unlike my brother, who has time to spare, I need to study hard. So, unless this is important. Forcing a strained smile, Yang replied, Of course, continue studying. He watched Liu return to the pavilion, clicking his tongue in frustration. Just when I thought he'd changed, he hears about Yong Su's possible marriage and starts acting up again. Yang tossed the remaining gang rong to nearby maids. Here, enjoy these. The maids' eyes brightened as they gratefully accepted the treat. Meanwhile, inside the pavilion, Liu wasn't focused on his studies. Smirking, he schemed to himself, just wait once Sister Yong Su marries. This palace will be mine. As evening approached, the royal court became heated, filled with officials arguing over who should oversee the monopoly on candy sales. Tensions flared as no one would yield. The king sat in silence, his clenched fists betraying his frustration. Finally, unable to contain himself, he shouted, Enough! All of you stop! Startled, the officials fell silent as the king stood, his gaze severe. Have any of you truly listened to me? Days ago, I asked you to devise a plan, and yet here you are bickering over merchants. Are you so eager to admit who's bribed you? Terrified, the officials bowed low, stammering, Your Majesty, we are at fault. Please forgive us. Glaring at them, the king spoke harshly. If you want to meet death, perhaps I'll consider it after reviewing this matter. They bowed deeper, their voices quivering. We will give it our all, Your Majesty. The king delivered a final, chilling warning. I placed you in these roles because I trusted you. Don't make me regret it. Trembling, they responded, We will remember Your Majesty's words. Exasperated, the king sat back down, rubbing his temples. Let's move on to the next issue. Later that night, the king sat in his residence, contemplating. Have I set my expectations too high, or are these men truly not up to the task? Meanwhile, at the left prime minister's residence, the right prime minister arrived, looking just as exhausted, dark circles heavy under his eyes. Master Fuang Tan, the left prime minister greeted with a weary smile. We're in the same boat, Master County Fat, the right prime minister replied. The left prime minister waved away the servant's offer of tea. Forget the tea, bring wine. The right prime minister declined with a sigh. We have too much to solve in the next 2 days to be drinking. They exchanged glances, both picturing the king's furious reprimand should they fail. Shuddering, they dismissed the thought. Elsewhere in the palace, at Princess Ji Su's residence, 2 eunuchs approached as she read. A maid's trembling voice announced, Her Royal Highness, the princess, has arrived. Ji Su blinked in confusion. At this hour? Who? In that instant, she froze, realizing who had entered. The door creaked open, and she stammered, Why, Your Majesty? It's late. Quickly, she dove under her blanket, covering herself completely. The king, noticing her behavior, grew concerned. You've been fasting for 3 days now. I'm worried about you, Ji Su. Are you all right? Ji Su turned to face him, still wrapped in her blanket, and gave a half bow. Greetings, Father. Your Majesty. She puffed her cheeks in a childlike manner, which melted the king's heart. But he quickly regained his composure, clearing his throat. His gaze wandered to the corner, where several bags of gangrong were piled. Smiling to himself, he thought, that boy, he's been sneaking around for 2 days just to bring her these treats. Then, adopting a more serious tone, the king announced, First, I'll cancel your engagement. Jisu's eyes widened in shock, and then, unable to contain her joy, she threw herself into her father's arms. "Father," gently patting her head, he teased, "You silly girl. You must still uphold your dignity as a princess." After leaving the princess's residence, the king and queen walked side by side, deep in conversation. "Are you sure this is all right?" he asked. "Do you mean about Yong Su's marriage?" She replied, "They'll be relieved to have one less worry, and she's still young. It's good to keep her close to us for a while longer." The king nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, earlier tonight, I drifted off for a moment and had a strange dream." "What sort of dream?" she asked. "A nightmare," he admitted. "In it, Yong Su fell ill and I lost her. It was heartbreaking, and even after waking, I felt an overwhelming dread. It took some time for me to distinguish between the dream and reality." He sighed. "Perhaps I'm not yet ready to see her wed." The following morning at the chancellery, the king reviewed the memorials with a furrowed brow. The officials stood silently on either side, waiting. After some time, he set the papers aside and began his critique. "I've examined your proposals thoroughly. While they're an improvement, they still fall short. Fan's proposal, in particular, completely misses the essence of the policy. Li Fan's approach is outdated, and Lai Fan's is all appearance with little substance. As for the Grand Counselor and the Prime Minister, you will need to revise your work." Time passed swiftly, and it was already late afternoon. A few days later, the ministers gathered again, visibly weary. The Chief Chancellor presiding over the meeting remarked, "Everyone looks exhausted." The Deputy Chancellor, dark circles under his eyes, sighed. "Since that day, we've been staying up all night revising our proposals, only to have them dismissed again." The Chief Chancellor continued, "We all know what His Majesty wants, don't we? The specialized trading policy is intended to prevent monopolies in goods production and sale. But the local aristocrats and officials exploit this, colluding with merchants to control the market and oppress the people. His Majesty aims to break this cycle. What if we send Treasury officials to oversee it directly?" he suggested. The room fell silent, shocked. "The Treasury Department?" someone asked. "But we only have 8 circuits." The Deputy Chancellor stroked his beard. "To manage specialized trading, we'd need to place officials in every protectorate." Another official objected. "The protectorates? There are far too many. We'd leave the Treasury Department empty." Frustrated, the Chief Chancellor slammed the table. "So what do we do now? If we hand this to commoners, we may lose our posts." They sat in tense silence until the Left Chancellor spoke up. "I have an idea." Meanwhile, in another corner of the palace, Liu stood with a murderous expression, his eyes cold and empty. "My name is Liu, Prince of the Yushan dynasty," he thought, trembling. "After 3 years here, this is the most dangerous moment I've faced." Hyun approached with a cheerful smile. "Brother, did you sleep well last night?" Snapping out of his trance, Liu forced a smile and greeted him. "Good morning, elder brother. Did you rest well?" Just then, Yong Su joined them, causing Hyun to flinch. She asked, "Hyun, has you been causing you any trouble lately?" Hyun hesitated, then patted Liu's shoulder, smiling warmly. "Not at all. He's been focused on his studies. The other day, I even saw him diligently practicing. You'll have to show me some sword techniques later." "All right?" To everyone's surprise, Liu obediently replied, "Yes, elder brother, I will." Satisfied, Yong Su changed the topic. "Hyun, you're attending court today, aren't you? You'd better hurry, or you'll be late." Hyun chuckled. "Now that my engagement is cancelled, I'll be visiting more often, but I must go now." With a quick goodbye, he left. Once they were alone, Yong Su threw an arm around Liu's shoulder, making him tense. "It's been a while, you. Spend some time with me, will you?" At court, the king announced, "The Treasury Department will manage monopolized trade directly. However, that would leave the department understaffed." The Left Chancellor, drowsy yet still standing, responded, "That's true, Your Majesty. To fill the manpower gap, we suggest holding a recruitment exam." He glanced up, pleased with his suggestion, thinking it would satisfy the king. The king, resting his chin thoughtfully, replied, "It's still not quite enough, is it?" He turned to Ihyun, the Crown Prince. "What do you think, Crown Prince?" Ihyun replied, "It's a sound idea, but it would require significant time and resources. However, if we recruit Confucian scholars from Sungun Guan, the Royal Confucian Academy, it may address this issue. The king raised an eyebrow. Confucian scholars from Sungun Guan? The left chancellor, slightly alarmed, interjected, Your Majesty, while the crown prince's suggestion is reasonable, the scholars at Sungun Guan have yet to pass major exams. They are still inexperienced. Placing them in official positions is no different from appointing the unqualified. Hyun countered, The scholars at Sungun Guan take exams monthly, with their performance ranked. Selecting the top performers from recent months increases the likelihood of them passing the state exams. Those who do pass will become excellent officials with hands-on experience. And even if they don't pass, they will still be capable civil servants managing the budget effectively. Hearing this, the king smiled to himself, thinking, Well said, he truly is my son. The prince sternly addressed the prime minister. What is your opinion? He asked. The left chancellor, unable to disagree, replied, I believe the crown prince's words are quite reasonable, your highness. With that, the prince commanded, Issue the order to Sungun Guan to supplement the treasury department with manpower and establish monopolized trading agencies under the treasury, reaching at least the district level. We obey your highness's command, they replied in unison. That evening, at someone's residence, two figures poured each other drinks, preparing for what seemed like a heavy night. The left chancellor and the chief chancellor raised their cups of Goryeo wine. Even if we drink ourselves into oblivion and can't rise tomorrow, tonight we drink to our heart's content, said the left chancellor. Absolutely, the chief chancellor replied, equally dejected. Serving under the great King Teo, I've never felt this discouraged. The chief chancellor laughed loudly and teased. Are you talking about those days when you were dismissed so frequently it became routine? Exactly. After today, just seeing his highness's eyes makes me hear his voice echoing. Is this the best you can do? You're still worse than my son. Both chancellors, frustrated, raised their cups and shouted in unison. That cursed father and son. The next morning, officials paced anxiously in the main hall. The left chancellor approached the chief chancellor, looking puzzled. Minister, today isn't a formal court meeting, just a regular session. Why are so many officials here? The prime minister, still smelling of last night's wine, apologized. Forgive me, I drank again after you left, but you haven't heard? There's an imperial edict requiring all officials of rank 2 and above to attend court. Something urgent must have happened. The court session began, and the prince addressed the gathered officials. The reason I've summoned you all so urgently is because, last night, I received an emergency message from the Ming court. Hyang, momentarily surprised, thought to himself, from the Ming court? What could have happened? It's the third emperor of the Ming dynasty, Emperor Yongle. He has passed away, the prince said, pausing thoughtfully. Does anyone know anything about the new prince who has ascended to the throne? Silence filled the room as the officials exchanged uncertain glances. Frustrated, the prince held his head. Oh heavens! Are you all so ignorant? With no answers from the officials, he let it go, issuing an order instead. Very well. Organize a delegation to attend the funeral. Among the delegation, include someone skilled in divination and a master of geomancy. Make it happen quickly. Understood, Your Highness, they replied. After court, but actually, His Majesty is in the next room. This time, Hyang was genuinely surprised. Really? Opening the door with a smile, he called, Father, what brings you here? The prince smirked. You little rascal. Can't I come to visit you? Hyang, laughing, replied, It's just that your visit was so sudden I am surprised. They sat together, and soon the prince brought up a matter close to his heart. Hyang, you're planning to search for books during the delegation's visit, aren't you? Yes, father. Though this trip is due to somber reasons, I won't miss the opportunity. Once the Ozen library is completed, finding books will be much easier, Hyang replied. The prince fished out a piece of paper from his sleeve and handed it over. Well then, take this with you. Bring back books related to this topic. Understood, father. Hyang opened the paper, scanning its contents, then glanced back at his father. But if these are books, can't you simply instruct the officials in the delegation to acquire them? The prince clicked his tongue. If I did that, they'd cry and beg for mercy. Lee Hyong opened the paper fully and was taken aback. Father, are these? His father nodded. Yes, they are books on phonology. Lee Hyong's face reddened. Phonology? No way. Nervously, he asked, Father, why are you interested in these books? The prince sighed and explained, I'm disappointed with the current state of affairs. The palace is filled with incompetence. Even in times when replacement is necessary, it isn't easy here in Roshan. While examinations may bring in intelligent people, there are still some who, even at death, struggle with Chinese characters. If we could create letters that even those individuals could read, imagine the talent we could uncover. Lee Hyong, still processing, asked, But why phonology? The prince explained, In books from the West, the letters represent sounds. I believe that letters representing sounds would be easier to learn. Lee Hyong thought to himself this could change history. Out loud, he responded, Father, I'll carry out your wishes. I'll make sure the envoys prioritize this list. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, In-seon was calling out, Brother Kim, where are you? Scholar Kim In-seon, lying lazily on a tree branch, sighed. Good heavens, I'm not a cuckoo bird. The noise you're making could kill me. Surprised, In-seon looked up. Oh, there you are. Why didn't you come this morning? There's a new decree, and it's remarkable. Kim In-seon jumped down, looking disheartened. It doesn't matter. I'm quitting my studies and going home. In-seon, confused, asked, Why go home? You're always competing for the top spot. Kim In-seon brushed off his clothes. Even if I rank first in the exam, it's useless. I'm 26 now. My first child is 6, and I still can't pass even the small exams. Do you know what happened? My ink bottle broke, and my spare was defective too, so I couldn't finish. Another time, I was hit on the head and fainted. I missed another exam because of quarantine. It's hopeless. Court, the prince voiced his displeasure. 103 students? Sung Kyung-kwan has 150 spots. What about the others? The Minister of Personnel nervously replied, Yes, Your Highness. That's correct. Is there a reason for this? The prince asked. The minister hesitated. Some study at Sung Kyung-kwan out of obligation. Angered, the prince exclaimed, What? The prince suddenly interrupted, furious. How is this respectful? Those aspiring to work in the court yet showing such narrow-minded views, how can this be acceptable? He looked directly at the left chancellor, who immediately tried to defend the minister. Your Highness, he doesn't have much experience, but the prince slammed the table, cutting him off. Nonsense. A broad or narrow perspective has nothing to do with experience. It's a matter of competence. How can the court be filled with people like this? The left chancellor quickly bowed low, pleading, Your Highness, I misspoke. Please forgive my words. The prince, still simmering with anger, thought to himself, How could my father have appointed someone like this? After a moment, he turned to the Minister of Personnel and asked, What is your plan for the future? The minister, visibly flustered, replied, First of all, I will implement educational programs in industry and commerce for the students of Sungkyunkwan within 3 months. Additionally, I will begin producing sugar reserves and set up a monopoly system. The prince nodded. A sound plan, but it seems each level will still lack sufficient manpower according to the personnel plan. How do you intend to resolve this? Sweating, the minister replied, I will select officials based on their performance evaluations. After a review period, I'll determine if they should be promoted or demoted. The prince, stroking his chin thoughtfully, said, Good, and when you made the announcements, did you specify that they must serve for at least 1 year? Yes, Your Highness, the minister replied. To reduce corruption, I won't allow them to work in one area for more than 2 years. Silently, the prince was impressed. This minister does have a solid plan, he thought. Aloud, he said, Very well. The vacancies left by other officials will be filled by Sungkyunkwan students. The Minister of Personnel immediately responded, Yes, Your Highness. We'll fill gaps by promoting current officials, and the Sungkyunkwan students will be assigned tasks according to their exam scores during their training. The prince continued, How do you plan to promote these students? The minister, feeling cornered, replied, They will start at rank 9 and gradually work up to rank 7. The prince considered this and then said, Rank 7? Increase it to rank 6. Startled, the minister stammered, Yes, Yes, Your Highness. Then, remembering a concern, he hesitated. But, Your Highness, is this feasible? The civil service exams don't recruit that many scholars. Can this be accomplished so quickly? The prince tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the memorials before him. Yes, increase it to rank 6, and proceed with Bacchio's plan. Understood, Your Highness. With that, the Ministry of Personnel's recruitment process began. When Kim In-seon and Lee In-seon joined, they were stunned. Rank 6? Really? Kim In-seon exclaimed. The recruiter nodded. Yes, if you work diligently in the Ministry of Personnel, you could be promoted to a rank equivalent to passing the top civil service exam without having to take the major state exam. Overjoyed, the two scholars hugged, tearful. Thank you for telling me, brother, Lee In-seon said. I want to study with scholar Kim In-seon as well. Kim In-seon, feeling hope after a long struggle, thought, a glimmer of light at last. He clenched his fists with determination. Long live His Majesty. I will devote myself completely. At the Eastern Palace, Lee Hyong, upon hearing the news, asked happily, so even scholars who haven't passed the exams have a chance? He looked at the tea in his hand, reflecting. It's almost like being an intern. Stay dedicated, and they'll become full-time officials. The prince laughed. Bacchio's persistence has borne fruit. They'll be compensated according to their ranks and rewarded based on performance. Smiling, Lee Hyong said, thanks to father's kindness, the scholars are studying harder than ever. The prince chuckled. You're quite the flatterer, aren't you? Just honest, Lee Hyong replied with a grin. And happy you told me in person. The prince smiled warmly. This wouldn't have been possible without your effort. I had to let you know. By the way, how much longer until you turn 15? He asked. For more years, father. The prince sighed. Time still has a long way to go. If only it would pass more quickly. 3 months later, Kim In-seon stood outside, marveling. Not long ago, I was merely a Sung Kyung Kwan scholar. Today, I'm a 7th class provisional official. He clenched his fists near tears. Your Highness, I, Kim In-seon, pledge my service wholeheartedly. Just then, Lee In-seon called out, Brother Kim, hurry, or we'll be late for court. The two rushed to court, eager and full of purpose. Nearby, some eunuchs, watching the excited scholars, whispered enviously, if only we'd registered. Well, their rank isn't very high, one said. Even the top scorer was only appointed a provisional 7th rank, another added. But if they're evaluated well, they could reach 6th rank by next year. Ha, easier said than done, replied another. To truly succeed, one must pass the imperial exams. In the Ministry of Personnel office, a tired man handed documents to the minister, who began reading with bewilderment. Why are there so many? He muttered. These areas are overpopulated. Wait, these others too? Suddenly, he remembered the Crown Prince's earlier smallpox vaccination program, which had led to the dismissal of multiple officials. He recalled when His Highness had instructed, conduct a census to ensure the smallpox vaccination reaches everyone. Work with the Census Bureau and SAMHSA. Though outwardly obedient, he'd thought little of it until he saw the report. His Highness had held up the report and said, is the population only interested in having children? I reduced taxes, even cut stipends for the royal family and officials, yet the tax revenue remains low. Why is the treasury receiving so little? In a moment of realization, the prince's anger intensified. While the people remain trapped in poverty, he shouted, tearing the paper in his hand. Why aren't any of you saying anything? Isn't it obvious? Who else could be responsible but the bureaucrats, the very officials you constantly protect? Everyone present was left speechless, mouths agape, shocked and frightened by his outburst. The prince continued, his voice booming. I considered your contributions, which is why I increased your stipends in the new policy. And this is how you repay my kindness. The officials could only bow deeply, acknowledging their fault. We deserve to be punished, Your Highness. Then immediately create an accurate census and land registry, he commanded, his tone unyielding. Yes, Your Highness, they replied, obeying the order. Later, in his office, the Minister of Personnel sat trembling as he recorded the numbers in the ledgers. Just remembering the prince's fury sent chills down his spine. From that moment on, the battle with the numbers began. Inside the office, a officials animatedly discussed the reports. The population in this area has increased 8-fold. What? Did you double-check? Another asked. Find out who's in charge of this region. Who's the magistrate there? Suddenly, someone rushed in from outside to report. Sir, someone has finally arrived. The Minister of Personnel exclaimed. Music to my ears. Overjoyed, he hurried outside to greet the newcomers. Please bring them in. I'm so glad to see you, he said to Kim In-seon and Yi In-seon, who were both taken aback. The minister himself came to greet us? They thought in surprise. Kim In-seon quickly greeted him. Hello, sir. We're scholars from Sungkyunkwan, here to assist in any way we can. The Minister of Personnel, delighted, turned to his assistant. Did you hear that? Yes, sir, the assistant replied. Each of the new scholars was assigned a mentor to guide them in their work. Kim In-seon and Yi In-seon were led inside and shown their seats. Two officials, with dark circles under their eyes, appeared carrying stacks of thick documents. Welcome, juniors. Apologies for the inconvenience, but here is the pile of documents that need to be processed today. Kim In-seon felt completely overwhelmed by the sight. Later that evening, the chief attendant's voice echoed through the halls. Your Majesty, the Minister of Personnel requests an audience. Let him in, the prince replied. When asked about the census, the Minister of Personnel knelt on the ground. The census is nearing completion, Your Highness. However, there are some matters I wish to discuss before presenting the final report. During the compilation of the household registry, I discovered certain regions with unusually large population increases. Inside, the minister's frustration boiled over. These vermin caused this. Please, Your Majesty, eradicate their entire clan. The prince reviewed the report, his anger rekindling. 5 times? 8 times the increase. This is a serious problem. He then turned and commanded, Summon the chief attendant immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. You listen carefully, the prince continued. Mobilize the investigative council and military officers to inspect these areas. If the local officials don't cooperate, they're authorized to use force. In a remote forested area, the sound of galloping horses echoed as a group of riders sped through the woods. Investigate thoroughly and swiftly, the leader commanded. We obey, Your Highness, they replied. Elsewhere, Kim In-seon awoke with a start, shouting, I'm late. Startling the officials nearby, he sat up, dazed. Don't worry, Junior, an older official reassured him with a smirk. As long as you haven't left yet, it's not officially late. Yes, Kim In-seon responded weakly. That night, he dragged himself home and collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. For more days until this shift ends, he thought, I'm so tired. The next morning, the officials prepared for another day of work. Kim In-seon and Yi In-seon, utterly exhausted, trudged forward, their faces pale. They sighed at the sight of the towering stacks of documents awaiting them. Lord Bayatahi approached, chuckling. I can practically hear your inner thoughts, he said. Lord Bayatahi, you're up already? Kim In-seon greeted him. How long have you been working here now? Half a month, sir, they replied. In another room, the magistrate and his chief official discussed the investigation. The Sa Hanbu discovered irregularities in Hanyang's population, the chief explained. What does that have to do with us? The magistrate asked, annoyed. Not related? It's very much related to us, the chief insisted. Just then, Judge Choi rushed over, calling out to the magistrate. Magistrate, I saw that the Federal Bureau was there. Have they reported to you yet? We need a solution quickly. Come inside, the magistrate gestured. Tell me everything, and keep everyone else out. Inside, Judge Choi began. I've heard many from Chungcheong province have moved to Hanyang. We still have time, but we need a formal explanation for this population increase. The magistrate considered this, asking, Any suggestions? Judge Choi offered. The number of slaves posing as commoners is rising, and the smallpox treatments I provided have increased our population. The magistrate grinned, clapping his hands. Ah, that's clever. If that fails, I'll blame it on my wife's cousin's neighbor, Ryo Young Hyen, the Grand Inspector. Judge Choi thought to himself, this has gone too far. Meanwhile, Kim In-seon and Yi In-seon were assigned new tasks in the government office. Exhausted but determined, they labored through the records. One day, As they sorted reports, Kim In-seon ran into a senior official. "Here," the man said, handing over more documents. "It's a report on population growth from all 8 provinces. Cross-reference it with the census by today." Elsewhere, Kim In-seon overheard a conversation. "If you marry multiple matchmakers, you'll get it for free," someone said, joking. "No way." Kim In-seon raised his hands in protest. "I already have a family." Beside him, Yi In-seon added, "I can't agree to that either." The man smirked. "Then give me 30% of your rewards for the next 2 years. 30%? Yi In-seon slammed his hand on the table, outraged. "That's absurd." In a sudden moment, the man scoffed, turning away dismissively. "Handle it yourselves, then. I don't know if you realize, but if the Me All Sunrise isn't done right, you could be at risk of losing your position." Kim In-seon was taken aback. "This is my first year in office, and 30% is far too much. I still need to save up for a house for my family back in the countryside." Though he wasn't happy, he felt compelled to bargain. The man sighed and finally relented. "All right, I'll drop it to 20% just for you." Yi In-song turned to Kim In-seon, eyes wide. "Brother Kim, we should really reconsider this. Perhaps we should consult with our peers first." But Kim shook his head. "There's no need, don't you see? They're pushing us into a corner. Better to get this out of the way quickly. Besides, I'll handle the cost since I'm the elder brother." The man handed them 2 contracts. "Sign here and it's official." They both signed the contracts, saying, "We'll leave everything to you." Escorting them out, the man assured them, "In 5 days, I'll have someone meet you at the government office. Just wait for the news." As they walked off, a figure emerged from the shadows. "Did you make a good haul this time?" he asked with a sly grin. "My pockets always fill up when fresh faces arrive," the man replied, smiling. "Don't worry, I'll share the profits. Just make sure everything is arranged properly." The figure, fanning himself leisurely, inquired, "Did you rile them up nicely?" The man chuckled. "What disturbed them? I didn't need to do anything." 5 days later, the Me All Sunrise was in full swing. Everywhere, people were singing, laughing, and dancing. The mood was lively, with everyone enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, Kim In-seon found himself restrained by a group who tied his hands and marked his face, treating him like a spectacle. Elsewhere, Yi In-seon was having his face drawn on and was even forced to carry someone on his back. Others were pushed into ponds after drinking from old, smelly shoes. The following morning, when the senior official heard about the festivities, his hand trembled, and he dropped his pen. "They held a Me All Sunrise? How many were there?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. A subordinate, bowing deeply, replied, "More than 20 people, sir." Outraged, the senior official slammed his hand on the table. "Are they insane? Summon everyone to the courtyard now." Outside, he bellowed, "Are you all out of your minds? The prince forbade any celebrations. Do you think a simple custom outweighs the orders of the imperial court?" Everyone looked around in shock, faces filled with fear. A man in purple leaned over to Kim In-seon and whispered, "He's just trying to scare us. A few days of repentance, and it'll all blow over." Meanwhile, the prince's anger was seething. The senior official, fearing the prince's wrath, addressed everyone. "This is no trivial matter. The Sahanbu won't ignore this, and it will surely reach the prince." The prince furrowed his brow, summoning the Thuangtan officer. The officer entered, bowing low. "Yes, your highness? Daesan." "No, it's not Daesan," the prince muttered, still deep in thought. Back with the senior official, he continued scolding, "You're all under strict watch now. Don't cause any more trouble." Dismissed. In the prince's chamber, his anger showed as he issued a new order. "Summon Penui Kampu immediately." The man in purple smirked as he whispered to Kim In-seon, "See? I told you. Now you've got a chance to rest for a few days." But their smugness was short-lived as a noise drew their attention. An entire squad of soldiers wielding batons marched toward them. They were soldiers under the command of the House of Yui Kampu. The group looked on, confused, while the senior official's face turned pale. "The House of Yui Kampu." The commander raised his baton. "By order of the prince, arrest everyone who dared to organize the Me All Sunrise. Surrender quietly." In front of the dungeon, 2 guards watched as everyone was led inside. Trembling and weeping, they were thrown into cells. Someone muttered, "I heard that once you're sent to Yui Campu, you never return." Kim In-seon was beside himself with fear, crying out, "I'm innocent. Please hear me out. I'm new. I didn't know anything." Another prisoner shouted, "Prime Minister Lee Sin and Chief Eunuch Lyric are my cousins. Let me explain, please." In the royal court, ministers were on their knees, begging for mercy. The senior official hesitated before speaking up. "Your Highness, we hope you can temper your anger. They made a grave mistake, but the conditions at Yui Campu are truly harsh." The prince frowned. "Last year, I forbade this custom and issued punishments. Isn't that still enough? I won't be lenient this time." Bizio, the chief official, interceded. "But, Your Highness, those involved are newly appointed scholars from Sunkyunkwan. This practice has both benefits and challenges. It's difficult to abolish overnight. Please, show mercy this once." The prince's anger flared anew. "So, building relationships is the excuse? Then who exactly are they supposed to be beneath?" The left senior official stammered, "The minor officials? And the left minister." "That's right," the prince interrupted. "They fear only those of the 5th and 6th ranks. And now you dare ask for leniency." The left senior official bowed, pleading, "Your Highness, I overstepped. I only sought clemency for the newcomer's foolishness." The prince rose to his feet, voice booming. "I don't want to hear it. These new officials ignored my orders. This is an opportunity to weed out the corruption and strengthen our government." Just then, a voice interrupted. "Your Highness, Fuang Tian wishes to speak." The prince's son, Yi Hyong, entered, saying, "I would like to discuss the punishment for those who have wronged you." The prince, intrigued, responded, "Of course, speak before the ministers." Yi Hyong stepped forward, smiling. "Why not assign work to those who had the time to organize the Me All Sunrise?" The prince, pleased with the idea, nodded. "Yes, an excellent suggestion. I'll give them 1 year. Anyone involved in this will complete their assigned tasks or face exile. For each incomplete part, a year of exile will be added." Bizio, the chief official, looked horrified. "Exile for that many years?" The prince continued, "Moreover, their salaries will be docked by 80% during this period." Yi Hyong knelt. "Father, perhaps reducing their sentence to 1 year would suffice?" The prince, serious, replied, "And you still want me to let them off easily?" Yi Hyong smiled. "Most of them didn't know about the Mi Yong Eri ban. If pardoned, they could lead efforts to eliminate the practice altogether." The prince's anger eased, and he grinned. "A sound plan, but 1 month isn't enough. Make it 3. Now what are you all waiting for? Carry out the orders immediately." "Yes, Your Highness." The following morning, those arrested were bound, their heads covered, and led away. "Move slowly, no rushing, keep in line," commanded a voice. Inside his hood, Kim In-seon thought, "Where am I being taken? Does the Prime Minister even know my situation?" Suddenly, a voice called out, "The new official from the Ministry of Revenue. Sit here." Kim In-seon's heart sank. "Am I about to be tortured?" In terror, he screamed, "I confess, I can't handle a lifetime of crippling pain. I admitted all. I colluded with merchants, accepted 3 carts and a piece of cotton for each Me All Sunrise group. Punish me, but have mercy." As the hood was lifted, Kim In-seon broke into a cold sweat, realizing he was standing in the Ministry of Revenue. Silence hung heavily as everyone around stared at him. Yi Hyung, noticing his friend's discomfort, quipped, "Well, this is certainly an interesting confession to stumble upon." Nearby, the chief official, Barcelo, glared furiously at Kim In-seon and pointed a trembling finger at him. "You ungrateful wretch. I've overlooked your transgressions because we're distantly related, and this is how you repay me." Yi Hyung, sensing the rising tension, backed away quietly. Now, let's all calm down. Please, Barcelo." A few days later at Gunfuck Palace, His Highness was seated above, eating leisurely as he addressed the officials below. "I know you've all been working hard, so I've prepared something to reward your efforts today." The officials, including BA CEO and Grand Minister Cassio, exchanged worried glances. Just days ago, he had reprimanded them harshly. The man beside him, however, clapped enthusiastically and said, "Thank you, Your Highness." His Highness smiled, lifting his bowl, and glanced at Cassio. "Very well, Cassio. Do you understand my mood now?" Cassio quickly replied, "Yes, Your Highness. I don't know how I could ever repay this kindness." With a softer smile, His Highness continued, "For the commoners to live in peace, we must work together to get tasks completed swiftly. This starts with household registers. Have you organized them yet?" Cassio nearly choked, muttering under his breath, "I knew it. I want to resign." Afterward, His Highness went for a walk with Huihiang and some of the ministers. As they strolled, Huihiang gasped, "What? The officials and merchants are colluding?" His Highness nodded. "Yes, and it's a serious matter. They must be dealt with." Suddenly, a servant rushed over, bowing deeply. "Your Highness, they've already entered the city." His Highness gave a calm nod. "All right, I understand. Remain calm. And who, exactly, has arrived?" Both His Highness and Huihiang exchanged a knowing look, a hint of satisfaction on their faces. "Ah, they've arrived," His Highness said. Huihiang asked, "Father, may I excuse myself to meet the officials accompanying the envoy?" His Highness gestured for him to proceed. "Go on. I'll see you later." In the main hall, His Highness addressed the officials. "It must have been exhausting to travel such a long distance. I apologize for summoning you here so soon, but this matter is of great importance." The envoy bowed. "I wouldn't dream of refusing, Your Highness. It is my duty to serve." With a thoughtful look, His Highness continued, "How is the new emperor?" The envoy described him as a mild-tempered man, poised and graceful. "His court speaks highly of him, Your Highness. While the late emperor was away on campaigns, he managed the country effectively and completed the conquests upon taking the throne. He has even declared that there will be no major campaigns without reason." His Highness sighed in relief. "That is good news. But where are the royal physician and the general who accompanied you? Bring them in." The royal physician and general entered, bowing deeply. Han Su, the royal physician, spoke up. "Han Su, humble physician of the Royal Medical Office, greets Your Majesty." His Highness gestured them closer. "What do you think of the new emperor's health?" Han Su hesitated. While he has an impressive demeanor, his body appears heavy. His complexion is pale, and his eyes seem clouded, which could indicate fatigue. He also shows signs of potential health issues. His Highness nodded, deep in thought. "Thank you. You may take your leave." Turning to the envoy, he asked, "So you also noticed that the new emperor's health appears unstable?" The envoy confirmed. "Yes, Your Majesty. He seems to struggle with severe obesity, which affects his breathing." Recalling his own son Hyang's words, His Highness thought, if his health continues to decline, it could affect his mind, putting the kingdom at risk. Sighing, he continued, "If your observations are correct, his reign may be shorter than expected. But what will happen to Yeojin's trading post in Shandong?" The envoy explained, "This was a major topic of discussion, Your Highness. The new emperor has decided to retain the trading posts in Zhoujin, as they benefit the Ming treasury. However, due to pirate activity, Ming forces will now guard these trading posts." As the officials murmured with relief, His Highness's expression grew darker. One official, Tao Lanjiai, commented, "With the Ming army protecting us, we have nothing to fear. A true blessing from above." At this, His Highness's displeasure became evident. "Is it truly right for us to govern in this manner?" All the officials fell silent, their faces drained of color. The prince, now visibly angry, demanded, "Ta Tuong, do you even know what you've done wrong?" Tao Lanjiai, trembling, stammered, I understand my mistake, Your Highness." "Is that so?" His Highness shot back. "Then why is it always just me who has to clean up your mess?" Tao Lanjiai's imagination ran wild, picturing himself defiantly shouting, "Then strip me of my title. I've had enough." He could almost hear his wife's voice in his mind, urging him to bear it for the family's sake. With a sigh, he whispered in resignation, "I am at fault, Your Highness." Without another word, His Highness turned and left, leaving the officials stunned. "What just happened?" one official muttered. "I have no idea," another replied. As the officials stood bewildered, the envoy exited, casting a wary glance at the gathering. "This court is tense," he thought, storming out and muttering to himself, What on earth was that about? At the Eastern Palace, Hui Hiang's voice echoed with excitement. Wow! I didn't expect you to find this. The eunuchs remained silent, marveling at the abilities of the royal envoy. One of them, sweating, finally spoke up. Shall I report this to His Highness? But Hui Hiang, grinning, replied, No need, let's just head back. At the Nin Hall's back entrance, a guard announced, Lord Ho Fap, the Minister of Justice, is asking if Lord Kong Fan is inside. Vice Minister Truong is inside. A servant announced as footsteps echoed in the corridor and the door opened. Lord Kong Fan looked up to see the Minister of Justice entering. Lord Ho Fap, he greeted. I didn't expect you to visit. I came seeking your counsel, the Minister of Justice replied. Lord Kong Fan extended his hand, gesturing toward a seat. Please sit. Once seated, Lord Kong Fan asked, So, what brings you here? The Minister of Justice leaned forward, explaining, You probably know that about an hour ago, the envoy from the Ming Kingdom returned. The Minister of Rights, the chief steward of the envoy, recounted the entire affair from start to finish, even mimicking everyone's expressions. His Highness became furious and stormed out. At this rate, how much longer can we sustain this? He sighed, his shoulders slumping. I think about submitting a resignation petition at least 10 times a day. Lord Kong Fan stroked his chin thoughtfully. Well, if it's come to this point. Abruptly, he stood up. Come with me. The Minister of Justice, startled, asked, Where are we going? You'll find out soon enough, Kong Fan replied. At the Eastern Palace, Huai Herong was reviewing design drafts when he noticed the officials nearby. You've all worked hard. Go back and rest, he told them. Thank you, Your Highness, they replied, bowing. Just then, Huai Herong's gaze shifted to the door, where he spotted two figures in conversation. He recognized Lord Dong and noticed the Minister of Justice as well. Curious, he called out, Is that not the Minister of Justice? What brings you here? The Minister of Justice, caught off guard, broke into a sweat. We came to seek the Crown Prince's guidance. Very wise, Huai Herong replied, inviting them inside. Is something troubling Your Highness? He asked. Huai Herong sighed. It's understandable that my father's angry. You are responsible for the nation's finances, after all. That's correct, the Minister of Justice said, his gaze dropping. Huai Herong's expression became serious. If we build an embassy near the Ming Navy base, it will lead to problems. The Minister of Justice looked up, puzzled. Wouldn't it be safer to build it there? Consider the financial leaks in Ming's budget. Even though Japan's pirate threat has lessened, it hasn't disappeared. Their navy's upkeep will be costly funding that will likely come from raised taxes. But will that money actually go toward naval defense or something else entirely? The minister's face turned pale. That would have serious repercussions on Roshan's finances. I hadn't thought of that. Huai Herong nodded. Exactly. We should assess the Navy base's scale and estimate annual costs. We can prepare ourselves financially. Understanding dawned on the minister's face. There's no time to waste. We'll get to work immediately. As he turned to leave, Huai Herong raised his voice. Quickly, there's no time. He then turned to Lord Young. Do you think the other high officials will debate my view? Lord Young, slightly surprised, replied, Most likely, yes. The Emperor will surely hear about this. Propping his chin on his hand, Huai Herong mused. Perhaps we should merge our opinions with theirs. You're right, Lord Young agreed. He truly believes that discussion improves governance, not for winning, but for wisdom. Thinking of Yushan's advancements, Lord Young felt admiration for Huai Herong. Yet, his thoughts soon drifted to his family, and he realized, how long it's been since I last saw them. Huai Herong interrupted his thoughts. Would you like to see some things I brought back from Ming? Lord Young's eyes brightened. I'd be delighted. Just then, a hurried voice called from outside. Is anyone here? The Minister of Justice opened the door, only to find the corridor empty. The left minister's voice echoed behind him. Why are you looking for everyone? The Minister of Justice jumped, startled. Lord Yu Sang? I thought you'd resigned. The left minister sighed. With recent events, my workload has only increased. The Minister of Justice nodded, gesturing for him to sit. Well, I have something important to discuss. Before he could continue, the right minister entered, saying, Is everyone here? Let's get to the matter. The Minister of Justice glanced around, making sure no one else would join them before speaking. The Crown Prince was furious and dismissed everyone. Everyone murmured in surprise, nodding in agreement. Indeed, thought the Minister of the Interior. So His Majesty is angry because of that? As the night deepened, the ministers continued to deliberate. This time, we need a better plan. We cannot make the same mistake, the left minister resolved. Later, at the Crown Prince's residence, the eunuch announced, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince is here. Let him in." The Crown Prince looked up. "Did you bring the documents?" Wai Hyong approached, holding the documents. "Yes, Father. I also brought a few other books." His Highness began reviewing the documents intently, so absorbed that Wai Hyong could almost feel his energy shift, as if he were drawing in everything around him. He's so engrossed, Wai Hyong thought with a smile. He's forgotten I'm here. Hours passed, and when the Crown Prince finally looked up, he noticed Wai Hyong had fallen asleep, face resting on the floor. He chuckled and lifted his son carefully. "You've grown so much," he murmured. "But take your time growing up." The next morning, a bleary-eyed Kim In-seon stumbled through the corridors of the Ministry of Personnel, muttering, finally finished organizing the documents. Exhausted, a voice suddenly called out, "You there! Can't you stop shaking already?" "Yes, sir," Kim In-seon replied with a weary nod. Just then, the thunderous sound of hooves drew everyone's attention. A rider approached, shouting, "Urgent report!" Meanwhile, at the Crown Prince's residence, the Crown Prince held a letter in his hand. After reading it quickly, he ordered, "Summon the minister at once." "Yes, Your Highness," the attendant replied. "No, wait, send word immediately to the minister and gather all high officials to meet me here right away," the Crown Prince amended. At the hunting grounds, voices echoed with urgency as the Crown Prince, Hyung, stood before a table laden with firearms, deep in discussion with his officials. Military officers from the north had been debating the effectiveness of current cannons versus older models. One officer commented, "If we're talking about the north, we really need to address the issue of wind direction. And the loading time could also use improvement." Suddenly, a messenger approached. "Your Highness, I beg your pardon, but all high officials are being summoned to the palace immediately." Hyung's eyes widened. "Right now? What's going on?" he asked, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Understood. Let's go." They set off at high speed, and as Hyung rode, he couldn't help but ponder the reason behind his father's urgent call. What could be so critical? He thought. Upon arrival, he rushed inside and approached Minister Park. "What's happening?" The minister looked just as puzzled. "I'm not entirely sure, Your Highness. I only know there's an urgent report from the north." "An urgent report from the north?" Hyung felt a chill down his spine as the Minister of Defense, standing nearby, added, "This must be serious." Hyung nodded, sensing an ominous weight to the news. A eunuch leaned close, whispering, "Your Highness, your military uniform has been prepared. Please, come inside to change." Hyung nodded. "I understand. Minister Lee Jong, I'll meet you all in the courtyard shortly." "Yes, Your Highness," the minister replied. Inside the main hall, the Crown Prince began. "I've summoned you all because we've received alarming news from the north." A murmur of confusion spread through the gathered officials until the Crown Prince addressed Minister Tan Chin. "Minister Tan Chin, read the report to everyone." "Yes, Your Highness." Minister Tan Chin opened the report and began. "As you know, last year's uprising in Yeonju caused a major disturbance. Recently, chaos has erupted again due to a massive migration from the north to the south. Reports indicate that around 1,000 households have moved southward, likely due to pressure from the Tada." Hyung did a quick mental calculation. One Newson household could have up to 15 people. That's almost 15,000 individuals. Minister Lee Jong and General Choi Hasen, whispering nearby, commented, "If they include cavalry, that could mean anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 troops. Among those, 3,000 to 10,000 could be heavy cavalry." The officials exchanged worried glances. They knew the Newson's powerful cavalry force had enabled them to establish the Jin dynasty and wreak havoc on Goryeo and Song before they were ultimately defeated by the Mongols. Now, if they united under a single leader, they could become a formidable nation, a threat neither the Ming nor Joseon wanted. Minister Tan Chin continued, The migration is being led by a figure named Li Manju. More troubling, the Ming has allowed the tribes to migrate freely. The room erupted in shock. What? How could they allow this? Talon Ji spoke up. Your Highness, it's likely this movement was orchestrated by the Ming themselves. The Crown Prince nodded thoughtfully. You make a good point, Talon Ji. Given the urgency, we must act swiftly. As the officials discussed potential strategies, Yi Hyung pondered the Nuzan's growing influence and the formidable presence of leaders like King Tidionise and Lee Songai. Memories of his past studies crossed his mind, and he muttered to himself, if they unite, the Nuzan could be unstoppable. The Crown Prince turned to his son. Do you have any thoughts on how to handle this, Yi Hyung? Yi Hyung responded, Father, I'm still formulating a plan, but I believe we need to start with the basics. Basics? The Crown Prince asked, intrigued. Yes, we must fortify our own defenses and enhance our strategies internally before thinking of taking on the Nuzan, Yi Hyung explained. The Crown Prince leaned back, contemplating. That makes sense, but something about it doesn't sit well with me. Yi Hyung continued. Our current strategies heavily depend on chance, Father. Starting from the ground up will strengthen our military. Talon Ji chimed in. Wise words. This approach avoids pitfalls that even the most skilled could fall into. With a small smile, Yi Hyung added, other strategies are beyond our means. Without adequate resources, even the best plans are doomed to fail. Suddenly, Talon Ji spoke up without thinking. Exactly. Realizing his blunder, he quickly covered his mouth. The Crown Prince shook his head. I see you all agree with the Crown Prince. Now, begin drafting military reforms and present them to me. We cannot neglect the nation's modernization. The officials responded in unison, Yes, Your Highness. As they exited, the Crown Prince chuckled, surprising Yi Hyung. Father, what's amusing? The Crown Prince laughed. I keep remembering Talon Ji's face earlier, it was priceless. That scrawny old man, so serious. He looked at the autumn leaves falling and added thoughtfully, Honestly, I had planned to delay military reforms, but it seems time won't wait for us. We need a strong army to navigate the political shifts around us. Yi Hyung looked at him in admiration. You truly think ahead, Your Highness. 5 days later, in the throne room, a stack of memorials awaited review. Frustrated, the Crown Prince threw them aside. Get rid of all of this. The officials, terrified, remained silent as he scowled. Thanks for watching, guys. Comment Flamingo and subscribe for the next part.